April 2013, Ancaster, Ontario, Canada. 32-year-old Tim Bosma was online looking over the advert he had put out for his truck. Tim was a contractor, a hard-working family man who doted on his wife and daughter and was a big part of his local church. He and his wife Charlene had a 2-year-old daughter, and a second child was definitely on their minds. In fact, they wanted 4 children and wanted to adopt as well. They were already talking to fertility clinics. But cash was always on their minds. Things were tight, things were paycheck to paycheck, and they were now even thinking about downsizing. They'd bought the land before they were engaged and built their home themselves, so it would be sad to leave it, but they knew wherever they went, they would be happy with their growing family. Tim, first of all, wanted to sell up his truck and get something a bit cheaper and easier to maintain. But the listing had been up for a few weeks already and had had little interest. Finally, he got a call from 2 men new to the area that were quite keen to take a look. Perfect, he thought. He would hopefully, finally, be getting rid of it. Tim arranged a test drive over the phone with them, and they said they would be there on May 6th. "When they come, should I go with them?" Tim asked Charlene. "Yes, you should, because we want the truck to come back," she replied. At 9 p.m, Tim was pacing around the house anxiously. Who comes this late to see a truck? He asked Charlene. Who knew? But at least someone was interested. Tim finally answered the door to the prospective buyers as Charlene was outside with their neighbour. Tim told Charlene he would be right back, and Charlene and their neighbour watched as the 3 of them got into the truck. Both she and her neighbour were feeling uncomfortable about the interaction. Something felt really off about the men and the way they were acting. Putting her nerves to the back of her mind, Charlene watched the truck speed away as she went back inside. It had now been far longer than she was expecting, and Charlene was getting nervous. Why would they be taking so long? And at this time? Had they broken down? Surely Tim would have called her. His phone was definitely charged before he left. She called him, but he wasn't answering. She felt sick as she picked up the phone and shakily called 911. Police pulled up to their rural property and Charlene gave them some descriptions. Both men were Caucasian and in their mid to late 20s. One was roughly 6 feet tall and slim. He had short brown hair and was wearing blue jeans and a long-sleeved orange shirt. The second was quite a bit shorter, with a much smaller and skinnier build. He had dark hair and a red hooded sweatshirt pulled over his head. She said they thought it was odd that they had arrived on foot. Their house was very set back and not near a main road, so walking all that way was a bit weird. The taller of the 2 men seemed polite and chatty, but the other man was not. He was staring around, didn't talk to anyone, and was appearing shifty. Investigators started looking for Tim's truck, a black 2007 Dodge Ram pickup. 24 hours came and went, and they had soon pursued more than 300 leads and set up a hotline solely for Tim's case.
As you know, we are here today in relation to the missing person case involving Timothy Bosma, who went missing this past Monday on May the 6th in the Ancaster area.
My name is Charlene Bosma, and Tim is my husband. He is my partner and my best friend. The last few days have been very difficult for myself and our families. This does not feel like real life. This only happens on TV and in movies. People have shared the missing persons poster all over Ontario, and they continue to do so. We have had so many volunteers helping us, and I cannot thank them all personally. But it means so much to me and to our families of these people, some of whom we do not even know. They take time from their lives to help us find Tim. Tim's world revolves around our daughter, and I know that she is number 1 in his mind right now. I ask, and I beg, and I plead to whomever has my husband to please let him go. Please drop him off somewhere, or make an anonymous call to the police so we know where to find him. It was just a truck. It is just a truck. You don't need him, but I do. And our daughter needs her daddy back.
Some CCTV did show Tim's truck being followed by another smaller vehicle heading away from his house. This was at 10:22 p.m. They couldn't read the number plate though, and the footage was weak. Mary Bosma struggled to hold back tears as she gave a statement about her missing son. She said her Mother's Day wish was to have him home again. Finally, they got a tip from someone that thought they had met the two random men under very similar circumstances. Tim had been contacted using a burner phone with the name attached to it being Lucas Bate. Looking at their conversations, they had learned of another man called Igor. Igor had also been contacted about his truck with someone using the exact same phone. The two men asked if they could test drive it before buying it. Igor agreed and sat in the passenger seat as one of the men drove. He noticed the distinctive tattoo on the man's wrist. It said ambition. Igor stood at 6'1", weighing 170 pounds, and during the drive he spoke about his time in the army. The man in the back seat had asked him what he had done in the army, and Igor replied, "You don't want to know." The chatting abruptly stopped and the two men drove his truck back, never to return or contact him about it again. Thanks to his more detailed description when it came to the tattoos, the police ran this information through their systems, checking the booking photos of people in the area with criminal records. A man popped up who had previous charges of possession of drugs and driving while disqualified. Dellen Millard. 27-year-old Dellen was now the CEO of his family's aviation business, Millard Air Limited, founded in 1963 by his grandfather Carl, and then operated by Dellen's dad Wayne, until his death in November 2012. The business was originally an airline, but expanded into becoming an airline services company. Despite filing for bankruptcy in the 1990s, the company pulled it back, and the Millards had a prestigious history in Ontario's aviation industry, and were undoubtedly a very powerful family. At 14 years old, Dellen showed great promise and talent and seemed to be following in his father's and grandfather's footsteps. He became the youngest Canadian to pilot both a helicopter and an aeroplane solo on the same day. He was an only child, and by all accounts his parents doted on him. As well as the business, his family had various properties and investments all across Toronto. Dellen was enrolled in private schools, took up expensive hobbies and classes, and enjoyed lavish holidays. He wanted for nothing. As he got older, he became a thrill seeker. He loved skydiving, off-road racing, and buying cars and trucks just to crush and smash them up. Dellen had worked a few jobs over the years. He had trained as a chef, studied animation, took courses in photography, but nothing really stuck. And knowing he could just quit and not have to worry about the finances, staying in a job he didn't like wasn't something he was ever going to do. It was much the same with college, which he dropped out of pretty quickly. Always seeking that adrenaline rush, he started stealing, which soon became a much bigger operation. He would plan heists with his friends, using his contacts and money to get into and out of various nefarious situations. Sprees of theft, arson and drug trafficking, you name it, Dellen's group was doing it. Dellen would spend his parents' money at a rapid rate on huge parties, hard drugs, and everything from modified cars and jet skis to guns and rocket launchers. He was someone that just wanted more and more of everything. Nothing ever quite scratched the itch for him. He didn't need to steal anything. Money was never an issue. He was just doing everything for the thrill of it. Friends said it was like he had developed a god complex. I think everything was a game to him. He was just so privileged, an old acquaintance said. After his dad's death at the end of 2012, Dellen was now in charge of most of the family's assets, Millard Air and Millard Properties Limited. The aircraft hangars were not used for the aircraft business anymore, instead becoming a place for him to store his weapons, stolen items and drugs. He asked one of his friends to build him an incinerator, telling people he was starting a pet cremation business. He then ordered a much bigger second one, which he could move around. It was called the Eliminator and cost over $15,000 to make and modify. Police tracked Dellen down, and when they told him they were there because of Tim's disappearance, he calmly replied, "I thought you were going to say that." They saw the tattoo Igor had mentioned, but apart from that, detectives didn't see anything obvious or immediately incriminating in his home. They put him under surveillance anyway. This was the only strong lead they had. They soon found that his phone had been bouncing off the same cell phone towers as the burner phone used to contact Tim and Igor. They followed him around the streets, watching him withdraw large amounts of cash from the bank and meeting a man that fit the description of the second person Igor and Charlene had described. This man had a long criminal past, and it proved easy to find his name. Mark Smitch. He too was put under surveillance. Just a few days after Tim Bosma went missing, police officers tailed Dellen in his SUV. They used their cars to box him in and, holding their guns, they arrested him on charges of theft and forcible confinement. He had $3,000 in cash on him, some black gloves which were sent off for testing, and the keys to Tim Bosma's truck. On May 12, 2013, police finally found Tim's missing truck in Kleinburg, Ontario. It was parked in a trailer owned by Dellen, which was on the property of Madeline, Dellen's mum.
It has been exactly 1 week since Tim Bosma disappeared while taking two strangers on a test drive of his truck in Ontario. Investigators think they may now have found the truck, but there's no sign of the missing man.
Donna, Hamilton police say at this point they're concentrating their search for 32-year-old Tim Bosma in the Kitchener-Waterloo region.
Yesterday, however, police were at this Kleinburg house seizing a trailer containing a black pickup truck, but say further investigation is required before they can confirm it's Bosma's truck. The house belongs to the suspect's mother. A neighbor called police after realizing the connection and says the trailer had been there since Thursday.
It's actually very disturbing. I really hope and pray that they find Tim alive. I really hope it works out positively.
Over the weekend, police arrested 27-year-old Dellen Millard of Toronto, charging him with forcible confinement and theft. His lawyer says he's exercising his constitutional right to remain silent and plans to plead not guilty.
As far as my client's concerned, he's shocked, he's very concerned, he's disconcerted. He is from a very good family with a great upbringing.
Today, police are searching a Waterloo Airport hangar belonging to Millard Air, a company founded by the suspect's family.
Millard will be in court here in Hamilton on Wednesday, and police are still not saying at this point whether they've identified a second suspect. Donna?
All right, Christina Stevens, thank you.
The vehicle had been completely gutted and painted, but forensic testing picked up huge amounts of blood, a couple of fingerprints, and gunshot residue inside. This led them to make an awful discovery.
It is with heavy heart that the Hamilton Police Service today announce the death of Ancaster resident Tim Bosma. The Hamilton Police Service has continued the relentless pursuit of all information and all leads, focused on the single priority of finding Tim Bosma.
Tim's remains were found in a huge incinerator on another property linked to Dellen, burnt beyond recognition. Dellen Millard was swiftly charged with first-degree murder, a charge he denied, and the trailing of his confidant Mark Smitch intensified. Police began investigating various properties and plots of land owned by the Millards. Millard Air owned 3 hangars at the Waterloo International Airport, and these were all searched. Dellen's devices were seized too, and through these, they confirmed a definite link to Mark. Mark was actually a very trusted friend of Dellen's. His life couldn't have been more opposite to Dellen's growing up, but they had a lot in common and had grown very close. Mark had met Dellen in 2008, and by this point he already had a long criminal history. A frequent user of oxycodone, LSD and cocaine, Mark started off as Dellen's drug dealer, but Dellen quickly trusted him to get involved with his various heists and crimes. Dellen would let Mark do construction work on some of his properties, and would often pay him back by letting Mark and his girlfriend Marlena stay in his homes for free. Mark was an aspiring rapper, and Dellen even promised to build him a studio.
I'm a killer, check my design, mountains I climb and throw you off too. Who's who, Blues Clues, Tell the cops anything, then you die on the news. Peace, bitch. You're deceased, kid. Fuck with me, say 10, the genius.
The black gloves found with Dellen had DNA belonging to not only him, but his girlfriend Christina and Tim Bosma as well. The fingerprints found on Tim's truck were also linked to Dellen. Dellen and Mark's phones showed them exchanging messages about stealing a truck and setting up several test drives with different people. After all these fell through, in April, they found Tim's advert online. The police's timeline was now this. Dellen and Mark, both already remorseless criminals that had gone undetected for years, had no intention of paying for the truck. They were going to steal it in any way they could. When they set off from Tim's house, Dellen was driving Tim's truck, with Tim sat in the front and Mark in the back. At some point, they pulled over into a field, and Tim was shot and killed. Dellen had parked up a second car there already, and this was what was picked up on CCTV. Now they knew where Dellen's airline hangar was, and they used that to find more CCTV along the route. At 20 minutes past midnight, footage showed Tim's truck, now with something attached onto the back. It looked like some sort of heavy machinery, likely Dellen's new incinerator. CCTV at the hangar showed Dellen and Mark inside, walking around. And then outside, sparks could be seen coming out of the incinerator. They burned Tim's body, cleaned out the truck, and swapped the number plates with Dellen's SUV. The next morning, Dellen sent a group text to his employees, telling them not to come into work that day. They said this was the first time this had ever happened. Dellen quickly had the truck repainted and the glass repaired from where the bullets had shattered it. When everybody returned to work, one of the employees spotted the newly done-up truck. He recognised the model from the media coverage of Tim's disappearance and took some photos. He couldn't stop thinking about Charlene's pleas for her husband's safe return.
You've seen pictures of Tim and of his truck? So please, if you see Tim or the truck, please call the police or call 911.
It was really playing on his mind, so he phoned Crime Stoppers to ask if this could be the truck they were looking for. When they confirmed it was, he ran outside and threw up. He knew what this meant, but also he now knew what Dellen was really capable of, so he held back on telling Crime Stoppers where the truck was until he was certain everyone else would be safe. He bravely confronted Dellen, but Dellen denied everything, saying it had been a legitimate purchase and a pure coincidence that it looked the same. But this conversation had clearly rattled Dellen, as on May 9th, he asked his girlfriend Christina to help him move the truck to his mother's using his trailer. They moved the incinerator too. When Mark Smitch found out that Dellen had been arrested, he called a mutual friend and asked him to start getting rid of the drugs and weapons in Dellen's home. The mutual friend phoned a second person asking him to help too, but this friend did not feel good about it, but agreed to drop things to Mark anyway.
Over the weekend, police arrested 27-year-old Dellen Millard of Toronto, charging him with forcible confinement and theft. His lawyer...
While in the car, he turned on the radio. The news was right in the middle of an ongoing case, the disappearance of Tim Bosma, and now the arrest of their prime suspect, Dellen Millard. He panicked and immediately turned the car around. Mark Smitch was also arrested and charged with the murder of Tim Bosma. He pleaded not guilty.
Police in Ontario have made another breakthrough in the Tim Bosma murder case. They've arrested a second suspect, a 25-year-old man, and will charge him with first-degree murder. Police say he's one of the men who took Bosma's truck on a test drive the night he vanished.
Today, the Hamilton Police Service arrested Mark Smitch, 25 years, of Oakville, Ontario. He will face a charge of first-degree murder.
Forensics officers were at a house in Oakville today near where Smitch was arrested. They say Smitch is known to police and that he and 27-year-old Dellen Millard were known to each other. Millard was charged with first-degree murder last week. Police now say they have wrapped up searches at a hangar and a farm belonging to Millard. They say earlier reports that the remains of a second person were found at the farm were wrong. new arrest in the Bosma case came on the same day as hundreds gathered to remember the 32-year-old.
Dellen's girlfriend, 21-year-old Christina, was also charged with accessory after the fact. With Dellen in custody, they started looking back at 2 more cases that they now believed were linked to him.
Meanwhile, it has emerged that police have reopened the investigation into the disappearance of Millard's former girlfriend.
The first was the disappearance of Dellen's ex-girlfriend, Laura. 23-year-old Laura Babcock was described as a free spirit, and with such an outgoing and confident personality, no one was surprised that her dreams were to be an actress. She was easy to get along with and someone so glued to her phone she would check in with you multiple times a day. Laura had actually been in a relationship with Dellen from 2008 to 2009. When they split, they would still sleep together from time to time and remained in each other's lives. Laura then started seeing a man called Sean, someone in a much different headspace to Dellen. He was dependable, calm, and a very hard worker. Dellen also had a new girlfriend, Christina, who allegedly had been less than impressed after finding out Dellen and Laura were still talking. Laura and Sean eventually broke up but still cared for each other a lot. He checked on her all the time, bought her an iPad and even threw her a 22nd birthday, inviting Dellen and Christina along too. As the summer of 2012 came around, Laura was going through a tougher time. She had really not been settled anywhere, was moving around a lot, taking drugs, and was sometimes working as an escort to make money. One evening, a lady named Jessica even watched Laura get out of a taxi with some luggage and her tiny dog. She watched for about 15 minutes before crossing the street and asking if she was okay. Laura said she had nowhere to go, and Jessica invited her into her home, asking if she wanted to stay for a few days. Laura said she didn't want to impose, but would be grateful to charge her phone a little. She then called a friend to pick her up, and a few hours later, Jessica said a tall, scruffy-looking man knocked at the door. The description she gave did not match Dellen or Mark, but Jessica said she instantly got a bad feeling about him. He turned to Laura and said, "Get your fucking shit and get in the car." Jessica was so uncomfortable she insisted Laura stay with her. Laura agreed, and Jessica woke up the next day to find that Laura had cleaned her whole apartment to say thank you. On June 30th, 2012, Jessica and Laura swapped numbers, hugged each other and said goodbye. Jessica told her to swing by when she could to pick up the rest of her things, including her sunglasses, which were still on the kitchen counter. But Laura never came back, and Jessica didn't hear from her again. Flash forward a month and no one else had seen or heard from Laura either. The police were called, but sadly it seemed the investigation never took off. They failed to take any statements from the people in her life. She had vanished without a trace. There was no activity on her bank account and no activity on her phone. Sean was really worried, and knowing that Dellen and her had been talking a lot in the days and hours before she went missing, he really pressed Dellen on her whereabouts. Dellen said he didn't know, saying that she had just called him up looking for drugs, but he hadn't given her any, and that was where the conversation had ended. He coldly told Sean he should have no reasonable expectation of finding her. Sean had told the police everything way back when she disappeared, and pointed them in the direction of Dellen, but they didn't speak to Dellen, and it seemed her case went cold almost right away. As Dellen sat in custody awaiting trial for the murder of Tim, police were now looking at his phone data from around the time Laura went missing.
First, I will update you on the missing persons case of Miss Laura Babcock. Laura Babcock was reported missing by an ex-boyfriend who became concerned when he could no longer reach her. A missing persons report was generated and an investigation was commenced. During the weekend of May 10, 2013, a Mr. Dellen Millard was arrested. As a result of his arrest, the Toronto Police Service became aware of several phone records belonging to Laura Babcock. As a result of this information, a production order was prepared, and we are now conducting a comprehensive review of the entire phone records. I can confirm at this time that there appears to be phone contact on July 3, 2012 between Laura Babcock and Mr. Dellen Millard.
Dellen sent a text to Mark Smitch a couple of months before Laura went missing and said, "How ruthless are you willing to be to make money? I have some ideas, but it's next level stuff. We'll talk about it this weekend. I know you need income." He asked his friend to trace Laura and follow her every move, with one text reading, "If you could keep me updated on where Laura goes to, that'd be of use to me." And the most damning text of all was to Christina, which read, "First, I'm going to hurt her. Then I'm going to make her leave. I will remove her from our lives." A couple of days before Laura went missing, Dellen ordered his new incinerator, the Eliminator, and bought a new gun too. It seemed that perhaps Laura had contacted Dellen for help, possibly a place to stay, and this was how she came to be with him that day. On the day she vanished, Laura and Dellen got together at a train station, right near one of Dellen's homes on July 3rd at 7 p.m, and after 7 p.m, her digital footprint ceased to exist. So, what had happened to Laura Babcock? Detectives couldn't be sure of how she had died, or who had been the one to kill her, but they believed her body was rolled up in a blue plastic tarp, stashed in Dellen's barn. This was confirmed by a photo of the blue tarp found on Dellen's computer, and detectives could tell from the way that it was wrapped up, it seemed as if Laura was inside it at the time. He was still testing his incinerator and setting it up, so Laura remained wrapped up and hidden for weeks. The iPad Sean had given Laura was connected to Dellen's computer, and he renamed it Mark's iPad, before gifting it to Mark Smitch. On July 23rd, the incinerator was ready to go, and Dellen sent a text to Mark saying, "Barbecue has run its warm-up. It's ready for the meat," and made a search for what temperature is cremation done at. Laura's body was then burned, and someone took a video showing the sparks flying from the machine. Pictures of what seemed to be charred human bones inside the incinerator were also found on Dellen's computer, and a day after Laura's body was burned, Mark even made a video rapping about it, and using Laura's iPad to read his lyrics.
The bitch started off all skin and bone, now the bitch lay on some ashy stone. Last time I saw her outside the home, and if you go swimming you can find a phone. Find a phone? What? Find a phone. If you go swimming you can find a phone. Find a phone. Find a phone. You can find a phone. If you go swimming you can find a phone. Bitch lay on some ashy stone.
Mark Smitch would implicate himself again almost a year later when he admitted to his girlfriend Marlena that Tim's body wasn't the only body they'd burned in the incinerator. Police then found a red bag in Mark's bedroom, still all this time later, which contained Laura's belongings. Dellen Millard and Mark Smitch were both charged with murder for a second time. The second case police reopened was just 4 months after Laura vanished, and 18 months before Tim was murdered. On November 29th, 2012, the police had been called to the house of Wayne Millard, Dellen's dad. Dellen gave a formal statement and told the investigators that he had walked into his father's bedroom at 6 p.m. and found him dead. A gun was lying near his body, and it looked like he had taken his own life.
I came in through the side door. It's the door most everybody uses in the house. And then I was on my way back to the kitchen to make a snack, and I noticed that my father seemed to still be asleep in bed, which was odd because it was late in the afternoon. And so I poked my head in, and something didn't really seem right about the way he was laying. He was laying very stilly. And then I walked into the room, and I saw blood on the pillow. And for a moment I had to leave the room. I actually went back to my room, and I got out my phone, and I walked back into my dad's room, and I called my mother, and I told her what I was seeing. I literally said, I'm standing in my dad's room, and there's blood all over his pillow, and he's dead. I stayed with her on the phone for a while, and I tried to get her to take a taxi, but she insisted she drive out. And so she drove over, and I texted a friend of mine, Andrew Michalski, and I told him that something terrible had happened, would he please come over? I didn't want to be alone. And he did. And we waited in the driveway together until my mother got there. And she pulled out her phone and she called the police. Or, well, she dialed 911.
Wayne's cause of death was ruled as a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and he was cremated within a week. Dellen then fired everyone at the airline business, changed all the locks, and essentially ran the company into the ground. Dellen told the police that the last time he saw his dad was around noon the day before. He said his father was struggling financially, was an alcoholic, and had depression. He said business had not been doing well, and his dad was now relying on his own savings and huge loans to fund everything. Although you can never really know the true mental state someone is in, many were left shocked and confused by the ruling. Something about it just hadn't sat right. Wayne had actually been in a really positive headspace about everything. He was a savvy businessman with a new plan of action and was keen to get everything back to where it once was. He was also telling people that he was ready to cut Dellen off due to his reckless spending and lack of support within running the business. He hoped this would get him into a new gear and motivate him to change his ways. Flash forward a year later and experts were looking over everything again. They found the position that Wayne would have had to be in to hold the gun would have been too unnatural to make logical sense. They tested shots on 20 mannequins in a bid to recreate the gunshot residue pattern as if it had been self-inflicted, but they couldn't make it match. Dellen's DNA, which was now on their system, was tested against what was found on the gun, and there was a 1 in 5 quadrillion chance that the DNA belonged to anyone else. Dellen had purchased the gun too. Phone records showed that Dellen's phone moved from Mark Smitch's house at around 1 a.m. to Wayne's house where it stayed until shortly after 6 a.m, despite the fact he said he didn't go near the property until he found him.
Project Capella is a multi-jurisdictional major case investigation looking into the homicide of Timothy Bosma, the disappearance of Laura Babcock, and the death of Wayne Millard. As a result of an ongoing and intensive criminal investigation that commenced on May 6, 2013, involving the collaborative efforts of the Hamilton Police Service, the Toronto Police Service No. 22 Division, and the Homicide Squad, and the Ontario Provincial Police, I can advise you of the following. Dellen Millard, 28 years, has now been formally charged with first-degree murder in relation to the deaths of Wayne Millard and Laura Babcock.
Dellen was charged with murder, the murder of Wayne Millard. He pleaded not guilty for a third time. And finally, 2 vicious killers, and in Dellen's case, a serial killer, were off the streets. Sean, Laura's ex, was busy himself, filing an official complaint against the Toronto Police Service about the handling of Laura's case and their apparent lack of interest in her whereabouts. He argued that if they had done their due diligence back then and taken it seriously, Tim and Wayne might still be alive. A 4-month-long trial would begin as the prosecution first sought justice for Tim Bosma. It wasn't a surprise when Dellen and Mark turned on each other and gave 2 opposing stories. Dellen said he only wanted to steal the truck, but Mark pulled a gun on Tim. Mark said it was Dellen that changed the plan and decided he wanted the contractor dead. But the prosecutor's theory was that they were both complicit and knew exactly what was going to happen to Tim. They carefully and meticulously tried to cover their own tracks, but not carefully enough.
Well, it was an incredibly emotional day at the Tim Bosma murder trial. The Crown zeroed in on the day police searched Dellen Millard's farm and what they found there. Shannon Martin is joining us live from the Hamilton courthouse. Shannon, the court saw a series of photographs. Share that with us.
Yes, we did, Anne-Marie. And as you mentioned, a very emotional day. By far the most emotion we've seen in court. Keep in mind, we have heard a lot of graphic testimony, but today there was open weeping as we heard from police officers detailing the frantic search at Dellen Millard's farm. They were hoping to find Bosma. Instead, they made a grisly discovery. In all caps and bright, bold red lettering, its name spray painted, the Eliminator, a heavy-duty piece of farm machinery used to cremate animals. When it turned up on May 10, 2013, on a farm property in Ayr, Ontario, this dirt biker pulled over and snapped a photograph.
asked by the Crown today why Chasmaine did so, he testified, "Because nobody would believe me that it was there, probably. I wouldn't believe it." His photo proved incredibly useful. The very next day, May 11th, police arrived at the farm armed with search warrants in their investigation into Dellen Millard. Sergeant Annette Hughes was part of the Hamilton police team that raced into the woods and came face to face with the Eliminator. She told the jury, "Looking at the sheer size of it, I thought it was a real possibility that someone could be inside. Not just someone, but Bosma." Hughes opened the top hatch. Inside was not one, but 2 bones.
Well, right now, all the defense really has to do is try to poke holes in the Crown's theory, and what they've been zeroing in on is the police, how they handled the evidence, whether any evidence was potentially contaminated. This is a 4-month trial, though, Anne-Marie, so it will be some time before we actually hear from the defense side.
Throughout the trial, Dellen's mum, Madeline, said she truly believed her son was being framed, calling him a gentle boy. The jury deliberated for 5 long days before finding both men guilty of first-degree murder. They were given life in prison with parole eligibility after 25 years. Christina, Dellen's girlfriend, also admitted to obstructing justice and helping Dellen destroy evidence, but avoided jail time in exchange for pleading guilty.
Today has been a very long-awaited day for our families. For over 3 years, we have waited for justice for Tim. For 3 years, we have been in and out of this courthouse, forced to look at and breathe in the same space with the utter depths of depravity in our society. We have had to endure being near the 2 men that walked down my driveway on May 6, 2013, and took away the bright life in our lives that was Tim. It is their own unspeakable evil acts that have taken away their freedom, while saying it is unfair. What is unfair is that now that this chapter is over, we have to truly begin building our lives. What is unfair is that regardless of all that has transpired in the courtroom today, one thing will never change for us. There is one absolute constant for us. This does not bring Tim back, and he will still never come home. For Tim's murderers, their life sentence begins now, and ours began over 3 years ago.
The men then went on trial for the murder of Laura Babcock. The ever-arrogant Dellen acted as his own lawyer this time, claiming that there was no evidence to suggest that Laura was dead. On the stand, he interviewed Sean and Laura's father, and was frequently pulled up for being inappropriate and personal, going too far with his questions. A big part of this trial was some letters they had seized. Dellen and Christina would write to each other while he was in prison, and in one letter he wrote, "It's a very real possibility that you will be called as a witness at my trial. Whatever you may believe, it needs to be put aside. This is what happened." He then tried to coach her, sending her a long, detailed story that she was to follow exactly. He said that Laura was doing cocaine with Mark, and Christina and Dellen had both seen her alive and well. They left Laura and Mark alone together, and the next day she was missing. Mark told Dellen that she had overdosed from mixing cocaine with prescription pills, but he hadn't wanted to call the police. Dellen's letter finished by saying, "Read this a couple of times, then destroy it immediately," something he would write at the end of just about every one of his letters. When Christina was arrested, they found the notes that she had written and left in her bedroom. One of them called Dellen "my sweet serial killer." Another said, "limbs cut off without hesitation." Again, both Dellen and Mark were found guilty
of first-degree murder of Laura Babcock.
They were given the same sentence, life in prison, with parole eligibility after 25 years. Laura's dad said that the trial had felt like a 6-week-long funeral, adding, "Like any parent that loses a child, we can only move forward with the thoughts of what might have been." And in September 2018,
news, a judge has just found Dellen Millard guilty of first-degree murder in the death of his father, Wayne Millard.
Dellen was convicted of murder for a third time in his father's killing. He smirked and stared at the ceiling as the verdict was read out. He was given an additional 25 years, taking him to 75 years before he could apply for parole. It was the longest sentence ever handed down without parole eligibility in Ontario. It would mean, if alive, he would be 102 years old. But after a change in the law, Dellen and Mark's respective 75 and 50-year ineligibility for parole periods were deemed unconstitutional, and this was reduced to no more than 25 years. They will now be eligible for parole in 2043, but whether or not they are successful is another story. Matthew Ward Jackson, another acquaintance of Dellen, was sentenced to 11 years after pleading guilty to 9 charges relating to gun possession and trafficking. Among the charges were the sale of a gun to Dellen that he had used to kill his dad, and the sale of a second gun that was used to shoot Tim.
The two convicted killers in the high-profile murders of Tim Bosma and Laura Babcock are seeking appeals from Ontario's highest court. Dellen Millard and Mark Smith are both serving life sentences, and while a recent change by the Supreme Court means the pair qualify for shorter sentences, experts tell us it's highly unlikely that would ever happen.
Dellen and Mark both appealed their convictions, but these were rejected in 2023. Dellen also appealed his conviction when it came to his father's murder as well, but again this was rejected. These killers were and are greedy, arrogant and entitled. They would stop at nothing to get what they wanted, whenever they wanted it, and if that meant taking people's lives, then they would, with no feeling or remorse. One has to wonder what would have been next if they weren't caught when they were. Laura was working hard to get her life back on track. She was finally around good people that really loved her, people like Sean. But sadly, she couldn't shake the reliance she had on Dellen, someone she thought was helping her and also cared about her. Wayne was really optimistic for his business's future and was ready to set his son on his own path, which would hopefully make their relationship less strained and much stronger. And Tim simply just wanted to sell his truck. He just wanted a bit of extra cash and plan a second baby with his wife. The only words that come to mind with a case like this are cold, callous, selfish, and totally senseless. We are so grateful to all of our viewers and all of our patrons, and we'd love you to consider joining our little community over on Patreon. It supports us as a channel and we couldn't be more appreciative of anyone that does so. It also gives you behind the scenes, extra episodes and early ad-free access.